Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for joining us again for another Great Money Monday. Our purpose, as always, is to help you and provide you with the tools that you need as you guide your own path to financial independence. And so today we have great speakers once again. And I know people are always like, and I know a few people are probably like, I don't know if I even want to say I'm coming to that. Hopefully you join in the Zoom if you don't want everybody to know. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you are on the cusp of divorce. You could be very happy and never, ever, 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 ever leave your significant other. But at the end of the day, we want to be prepared that if that time comes, that you have the tools that you need in order to leave that situation peacefully and financially intact. And so today we have two great speakers and they really specialize in this space. So we have Natalie Coley and Devon Barrett, two people who are experts. And unfortunately, they're seeing the divorces day in and day out. So they know some of the ins and outs of what happens in the beginning and the end stages, hopefully some peaceful, and of course, maybe some not so peaceful parts in terms of as you leave these relationships. So Natalie is an associate advisor at Francis Financial and supports clients with financial planning and portfolio strategy. She received a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering at the University of California, Santa Barbara. After 7 years as an engineer in the pharmaceutical industry, she decided to follow her passion for personal finance and change careers, joining Francis Financial. Earlier this year, Natalie earned her CFP designation, and Natalie has been featured in various press outlets such as Financial Planning, Daily Finance, Grow from Acorns, Mass Mutual, Real Simple Magazine, and U.S. News and World Reports. Devon is a CFP as well and a certified divorce financial analyst at Francis Financial. As an associate advisor, Devon supports his clients with comprehensive financial planning and portfolio strategies. Devon graduated from New York University with a bachelor's degree in economics. He's been featured in a various number of outlets such as Barron's, Financial Planning, The Balance, Grow from Acorns, Biz Journals, Chase.com, and U.S. News, as well as World Report. He was also featured as a guest in a podcast called Financially Ever After. Devon is passionate about giving back and helps women who cannot afford to hire financial professionals by volunteering as pro bono advisor with the nonprofit Savvy Ladies. So don't be, side-eyeing him because he's a man in our space today, ladies. So I want to turn over the mic without further ado to Natalie and Devon.
Thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction.
We need you to start all of our meetings with that type of introduction. It really builds us up. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely our hype woman. Well, Devon and I took a little bit of a risk today because in New York, the vaccine was released for 30 and older. So we both happened to win the lottery and get our vaccines yesterday and ran the risk of potentially not feeling great today. But we both feel 100% luckily. So you feeling good, Devon?
Feeling good, ready to go. Ready to talk
Awesome.
about it. Take the stigma away from divorce. Let's dive in.
Happy to be here. And you can see our screen, Rosalind? Good, perfect, awesome. Well, as the introduction said, we're with Francis Financial, and at Francis Financial, we specialize in helping women who are going through transitions such as divorce, loss of a spouse, or a receipt of an inheritance, but helping women financially prepare for and empowering them after divorce is really, at the soul and the heart and soul of what we do at Francis Financial. Our founder, Stacey Francis, started the firm when in college. She was a French major, and she spoke to her grandmother who had stayed in an abusive marriage her entire life, one that eventually killed her. And she asked her grandmother, "Why are you staying with him?" And her grandmother said, "Because of money. I'm afraid that I won't be able to financially support myself if we were to get a divorce." And that caused Stacey to change the entire trajectory of her career and start Francis Financial at the very young age of 27. And now we help women every day face the fear and the financial struggles of going through divorce, considering divorce, But then we have the benefit of being able to see how amazingly empowered they are on the other side and how the world just opens up to them. So really excited to speak with everyone today. We'll be going over, why being financially knowledgeable is so important. I thought it was really well said, Rosalind, that if you're watching this, it's okay if you're not even considering divorce. This is totally applicable. We're going to share a lot of information that we sometimes give to our women who are in the midst of divorce, but it's kind of like a little late. Like you should have been in the know about all these things during the whole marriage. So if you're not even considering divorce, this is wonderful. You're really getting a leap ahead. Initial steps to take when you're thinking about getting ready for divorce, mistakes you don't want to make, and then the top 5 financial steps you should take to rebuild your finances after divorce. So it's no surprise that women are a little behind men when it comes to being financially sound. And there are a few reasons for it, really. One is we tend to earn less than men. And we tend to take a step out of the workforce more often to care for our family members, children, or to support our spouse's career. And that has an impact on our long-term earning power. And we live longer. So we need more money to support our longer lifespans. Add divorce into the mix, and there is an additional huge hurdle, which is just a math problem at the end of the day. Essentially, you have one pot of money that used to support one household. Now it needs to support 2. So what used to support 1 rent now has to support 2 rents, has to support 2 sets of utility bills. The phone bill is more expensive because now you're not on the family plan, et cetera, et cetera. So to maintain the same standard of living post-divorce, you need around 30% more income, essentially. And then on the flip side, women's income tends to drop by more than 1/5 after divorce. And that's, that's because of really spousal support. There used to be a day when couples would get divorced and judges would grant spousal support for the woman's life, and it would be pretty adequate to maintain her standard of living. That doesn't happen anymore. And spousal support is really getting hacked into by the courts. Judges don't like to award it for very long. You can be in a 20-year marriage, and it does vary from state to state, but in New York, what we see, you could be in a 20-year marriage and get 5 years, 7 years of spousal support. It's really, really tough. So you have way more expenses and you have less money to pay those expenses with.
Right. And, expenses, that's a good segue, Natalie, into the next piece of our discussion here tonight. It's, we'll approach this as what we should know before, during, and after, as far as, well, 1, what do I need to know right now? 2, who am I? What am I trying to accomplish in this? There are different goals that everyone has approaching a divorce. So, getting an understanding of what your values are and what you're trying to accomplish. And also, who's the team? Like, who can really help me achieve these goals? That's the way we'll approach this. And I think the best way to start with it is to think about, this slide that you see, the stat you see right in front of you. It's 3 out of 4 divorced mothers do not receive full child support payments. And why is that so important? It's because the top 2 concerns when people go through divorce are, 1, what's going to happen to my kids? And anyone that's a parent can understand, well, why would that be the number 1 concern? But then also number 2, financials. What's happening to our assets? As Natalie mentioned, you have to stretch a dollar much more than you maybe had expected to. So, child support is an interesting point because it's where those 2 kind of concerns intersect. And so when you think about, well, how would a mother not receive child support? I think people's brains go to, well, the quintessential deadbeat dad scenario where he's not paying that monthly amount that he's supposed to be paying. And that, when that is one aspect of it, that's basic child support, that, money that you pay you receive to, go towards their housing, go to your children's shelter and food. But there's also another aspect that we want to talk about. I think this is a good way to get our feet wet, to show how nuanced divorce can be, because there's another part that's a big piece of child support in some cases, what's called add-ons. So you think about, yes, that check you get per month or that check you pay per month for the kids, basic, that's one. But then what about things like after school activities? What about things like birthday parties? What about things like, even insurance, health insurance? So these are things that people may not think about in the beginning. And while child support is pretty straightforward, the basic version, Something like add-ons is negotiable. So we've seen the gamut of somebody pays 100% of these expenses, somebody pays, or they split it 50-50, and we've seen everything in between. So that's something really important to understand. Well, how do I track these? And how do you get to that point? Well, understanding what you spend. That's step one. I think that's a good segue into our next section about, well, understanding where am I and to start. So I mentioned we would talk about, getting educated, understanding that first step of getting your expenses together, understanding what your income is, but then also understanding what you're trying to accomplish and who your team is. So on the next slide, you'll see that we are really trying to get, sorry, I'm frozen. Oh, there we go. So understanding your lifestyle. Your lifestyle is unbelievably important. And I'll throw myself under the bus. I'm a financial advisor. So you would assume that I know my expenses in and out, but that's not how I approach my financial situation. My wife and I, we have savings targets. And if we hit those savings targets, not really concerned with where the money goes, as long as we're hitting those targets at the end of the year. And I think many people approach their situation that way. As long as my bills are covered, as long as I'm putting a certain amount into my 401k or my bank account, you're not really tracking how much you're spending at Starbucks versus your niece's dance recital versus, a night out on the town. But unfortunately, divorce does require you to take a deeper look at what your lifestyle is going to cost for a few reasons. Because when you approach the negotiation table trying to figure out, well, how are we going to split these assets? It's hard to advocate for yourself for what you need if you don't know what you spend, because then you can't really make that case for yourself for what you need. So that's really step one. And I think the best takeaway for this, if you're trying to determine, what your lifestyle looks like, is to just take a step back and review your expenses. And that's a good exercise for anyone, whether you're going through divorce or not. At least once in a while, just take a look at your year-end statements, your monthly statements, credit cards, checking accounts, bank accounts, just to see, well, where's my money going at a higher level? How much am I attributing to vacations, to food, to the kids? Because these are things that, unfortunately, if you do get into the divorce arena, you're gonna have to parcel that out in what's called a lifestyle analysis to show, well, this is how much I'm spending, and this is how much I'm gonna need.
Yeah, and
So
I think a lot of people are really embarrassed about this step. And in fact, I just spoke with an attorney who said that she made her entire office do a lifestyle analysis of their own spending so that they could understand how painful it is to really see exactly how you spend your money. Because just like you, I do it to myself every year as well. It is so horrible. It's like offensive to see where I can spend my money. But we all have this, you spend way too much on coffee and random junk on Amazon, but it's so important, because if you don't have an accurate representation of what you spend, how are you going to fight for what you need?
Right. And that's the goal of today. We really want to destigmatize this, because that's why I started by throwing myself under the bus. Like, the Amazon people probably know me by first name, and they greet me, "Hey, Devon, good to see you," because we do spend a lot on Amazon. But that's important to know. You don't want to judge yourself when you do this exercise. It's just purely for data and not to pass a judgment on yourself, as we tend to do. We're our own harshest critic. Income is a bit easier because people, even if you don't track your expenses, people tend to know how much you make. But I think the exception to this would be that if you're a business owner or you have inconsistent cash flows, this is something that you want to keep an eye on, especially because when you're thinking about income, especially if you're not sure how it's going to change over time, because there will be a situation there could be a situation where you're making a negotiation based on your earning power right now. But if you're in a very variable type of industry, you may not be able to keep up that same type of payment or that same level of income. So it's important to really consider your income situation, not just now, but down the road as well, if it's something that could be fluid and changing. And accounts and assets, this is another big one, really understanding, well, what do we even have? And this is another one that's important if you're the spouse that is kind of hands off with the situation. Again, I'll make it personal. My wife, before we got married, did her own taxes. Now that we're married, I will do our taxes. So, as that goes down, and that's many people, right? Divide and conquer as a couple. But as you go down the road further and further down that, it's easy to lose sight of some of the little nuances of the logistics of your financial situation. If all you're really doing is, I trust my spouse, I'm signing off on the tax return. So you may lose sight of, somebody opened another account here, we're moving money, we're funneling money over here because we're getting a great rate at this bank. So I think when you're really about to approach that divorce, understanding what do we have and where can I find that information? Tax returns are key. If you have access to a tax return, there's a lot of great information that you can get from there, because the government, Uncle Sam is going to get his money. So know that if you're trying to track an asset, if there's any kind of income generated from it, it's going to be in your tax return. So I would say Schedule B, if you're going to look at a tax return, that It's a great source of information as far as if you're receiving any income, dividends, anything like that from a bank account, brokerage account, from even a stock or a bond, it's going to be on that schedule. So that's a great place to look if you're trying to track down assets. Similarly, I would say Schedule D as well, because if that's where you see capital gains. So if you sell an asset at a gain, it's going to be there. So you may say, well, why is that important if we sold it? Well, we want to know where it was sold from and where did that money go, right? Because if you submit a big gain and you haven't seen that in any of the accounts that you have seen, maybe there's another account somewhere that you should be looking for. So that tax return is going to be your gold mine if you're really trying to figure out, well, where's my starting point for finding my assets.
Yeah, even in a amicable divorce situation, we have a client come to us not concerned that her spouse is hiding assets or anything,
Right.
and she'll give us the list of assets and give us a tax return. And we looked at Schedule B and Schedule D, and all it says is the account name or the bank name and the amount that is reported. But you can see, okay, well, they said that they have a Wells Fargo account. Yep, I see that here. Well, they didn't say that they have an E-Trade account. So where is this account? So it's just a great way to double check.
Right. And it's a great point now that you made it, that it's not necessarily you have to worry about your spouse trying to hide something or trying to pull the wool over your eyes. Life happens. People forget. You guys may have opened an account that you got a nice wedding gift and you opened an account 25 years ago and you forget that it's there, but it's still generating interest. And it's maybe something that's easily forgotten about what you guys are trying to negotiate, but that tax return will remind you that, oh yeah, we do have that account at Citibank that's got 50 grand in it.
Now, is there any advice for some of the ladies, especially if you gave all the information and you decided, hey, I'm not going to handle the money at all, and now 3, 4, 5, 10 years have gone by and you've never asked to see the books, and now you're like, hey, show me what we got. What's a maybe less abrasive way that they don't, start to feel like, oh, well, why are you asking about this now? What's a good way to kind of broach that topic and say, now I want to be involved?
Great question, Rosalind. I think one way to approach that is to try to make it romantic and sexy, and what we call a financial date night, right? It's that, hey, you know what, babe, I know you've been working on this and I've been out of it and I really appreciate you taking that time. But, I just want to get educated. I want to be your partner there. So like, let's take them, pour some wine, walk me through what we've got and walk me through what the plan is, just so we can revisit it. And that's for anyone. I think if you're a couple, whether you're happily married or thinking about divorce, financial date nights are key because it keeps you guys on the same page and it can take the pressure off. Everything's a little less tense over a glass of wine or, over a nice dinner. So that's one recommendation, I think, to try to have those recurring more frequently beforehand. And then, as the time comes, it doesn't seem quite so suspicious that maybe you're asking about assets at that time.
Yeah, and I think there are two scenarios here. One is a scenario where you kind of want to play catch up, but you don't want to offend your partner and make them think something fishy's going on, right? And then that's a financial date night, totally our go-to as well. But then the other one is, all right, what if you think that your partner is really not into showing you the books? Like maybe they're trying to keep you in the dark a little bit. There's a name for it, that's financial abuse. And we see this happen all the time too. And in that case, it's a lot trickier. You have to know your spouse well enough to know how to play their game a little bit. Pretend that you're, being dumb or, whatever you need to do to kind of get that information over time without triggering them, you need to do. This, I think, is the most important slide in the whole presentation because knowledge is power. We recently met with a woman who found out her husband was having a 5-year affair. They've been married 25 years. She's obviously irate, wants a divorce, but she took the time and the forethought to gather all of their financial information and contact an attorney to understand the best strategy and approach, and to contact us to put together a real plan of attack to figure out what she needed from the divorce. So now when he comes back from his little tryst with the other woman, all relaxed, she's going to hit him with, I want X, Y, and Z. And it's going to totally knock him off kilter. He has no idea what's coming, and she is armed and powerful. And that's the position that you want to be in.
Right. And one last thing I do want to say about that too is just keep your eyes peeled, because there are, life events that happen that cause you to have to gather financials. So if, you and your spouse are refinancing your mortgage, or you and your spouse just had a child and you want to update your will or your estate planning. These are times that you tend to have to gather financial documents together to hand to that professional, whether it's the mortgage broker, whether it's the estate planning attorney, whether it's an insurance specialist. So that package, like right before you sign up on the dotted line, maybe that's something you want to save down, or something you want to make a mental note of. Well, let me see that schedule of assets that we have, and does everything look familiar to me?
All right, so honestly, I look at this, the whole check your credit report, and I groan kind of every time, because it's one of those things you hear again and again and again. You got to keep your credit score up, but it really is worth saying, because it's one of those easy big wins, right? You have a good credit score, you're going to get the best, the lowest interest rate on your mortgage. You're going to be able to save hundreds, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of your lifetime in terms of what you're going to be paying, the percentage on loans. We have a client who went through a really rough divorce. Her husband just destroyed her joint credit, unfortunately. And now she has to pay her rent each year, a year in advance. So like there's some really serious financial implications and repercussions to letting your credit score fall or go into disrepair. So the first thing, if you're thinking about divorce, if you're going through the divorce process already, even if you're not considering divorce, but you haven't done this in a while, pull your credit report. Not necessarily, you don't necessarily need your score. What you're looking for is the really boring report that shows you all the information, hopefully you already know, all of the accounts in your name, the address that you are associated with, any late payments. Go through every single line item with a highlighter and make sure it's all correct. If anything looks wrong, fix it at the agency. There are 3 agencies: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. And you can go to mycreditreport.com. It sounds scammy, but that's actually the legitimate site that you go to, where you can pull all 3 of these reports once per year for free. And just take a look, you know, during the divorce process. Sometimes, even if it starts out on an amicable basis, one spouse or the other can get really offended and just do some really stupid stuff. We've seen spouses open accounts in either both of their names or just in your name. And it's really dirty, but it happens. So signing up for credit monitoring throughout the divorce process, also a really good idea. If you need to build your credit, if you pull your credit score and you see that it's a lot lower than expected, then it may behoove you to open a small credit card in just your name to start building that credit. So again, you're not in a really difficult position once you do leave the marriage. Another piece of advice on credit would be to open a PO box or a mailbox at a UPS store, so that you can change the address associated with your credit reports. You can call each bureau, give them your new PO box or UPS box address throughout the divorce process. That will make it more difficult for your spouse to open new accounts in your name without you being aware.
I think to piggyback on that, we have a question in the chat. It just says, if your partner has placed a lien on your marital house, you bought the house because of his back taxes owed. If the court determines that he is responsible for the tax, is it feasible for the IRS to lift the lien on the house?
Oof. One of the big questions is, when was that IRS bill incurred? If it was incurred during the marriage, there could be a real problem. You know, you talk about marital assets, there's also marital debt. And that could be a really sticky situation that could honestly be drawn out quite a bit in the courts and fighting with attorneys.
Right. And logistically speaking, you know, you mentioned that the question asker mentioned that you know, the court has determined that it's going to be the husband's responsibility. Well, then there's lawyers involved, right? So that is a legal question to ask your attorney about logistically how can that be handled, because there are situations that we'll see where if, you know, it's 100% determined to be him, then maybe there'll be a situation where you will get more in assets to make up for that fact, right? His portion will be docked. But again, that's a legal question. I'm gonna take my lawyer hat off. I'm not gonna pretend to be an attorney on here. I'm not gonna practice any law, but that is a question that, you know, to communicate with your attorney. I think, that's a good segue into your team, actually.
Yeah, I mean,
It's another reinforcement of why you should know these things early and often. So
Right.
if you need to disconnect a little bit more, or disconnect sooner, at least you'll kind of have a head start on it too.
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll be honest, there are a lot of questions we get that are similar to that one that they're just rough. It's just a crummy situation. It's like a sprint down the aisle to get married, and it is a marathon to get divorced. And it is not always fair. It's really messy. It's difficult to untangle yourself. One of the definitions of marriage is a financial partnership, and it is really difficult to untangle that, or it can be really difficult to untangle that. So super important to have a really solid support team behind you. Therapists, they can work with you. Obviously, I think the benefit is pretty well known here, to untangle some of those experiences you've had in your past and help you avoid making similar sort of patterns in the future. Now, one thing that might be a little unique to people on this call are coaches. There are specifically divorce coaches, and I'm just sort of curious how many people have heard about them, because I certainly didn't before I got into this line of work. But it can be really overwhelming to go through the divorce process. I mean, you have to learn, it could be you have to learn all about your financial situation. It may be that you weren't in the loop as much as you should have been. That's overwhelming to begin with. Or you may know about the financial situation, but it's really overwhelming to think about how it could impact you long term. You have to learn the legal process, which is really scary and very complex. So a divorce coach can really help you avoid becoming stuck in the process. And we've worked with plenty of women who they're just not able to process information like they normally would. Some high-powered women who are really struggling to process information, to remember things. They say that divorce can be worse than losing a spouse to death, because your spouse is still alive out there living a life that presumably might be better than the one they were living with you. So it's really psychologically traumatic. A divorce coach can help you take action. So that's how they differ from therapists. Divorce coaches really try to move you forward through the process. There may be some questions about why there's attorney listed here and mediator. You may be in a mediation, which is, you have a mediator, you're in the room with your spouse, and you're trying to just come up with a fair solution, brainstorm almost. But two things here. One, mediators don't have to be attorneys. Not all the time, not necessarily. You can just go to mediation training. And so the second piece is whatever is decided in that room is like a negotiation between you and your spouse. It is not the letter of the law. It's kind of what you can get, and flip that around, what your spouse can get. So you want to have your own consulting attorney for sure on your side to review that agreement before you sign on the dotted line, to make sure that you are aware of everything you're entitled to, that you may be giving up. And then, oh, go ahead, Devon.
No, and I was just going to jump on that too, that having an attorney, someone who's that advocate for you in your corner during a mediation, doesn't signal ill will. It doesn't mean that you want to go to court. Just like Natalie said, it's someone that has their eye over your shoulder, because the mediator's goal is to be as fair and amicable as possible for the two of you, whereas the attorney is your advocate, really making sure, especially important if there's a balance of power dynamic with, financial knowledge or just anything like that. You really want to make sure that you have someone that's leveling the playing field when you're coming to a negotiation.
Yep. And lastly, things like accountants, professionals that you maybe had as a couple, probably want to consider finding a new professional to serve in that role, unless you were the one with that strong relationship. Often, not to gender stereotype, but what we often see is that the women weren't the ones with the relationship with the accountant, with the advisor, etc. And speaking of advisors, the one professional who is not on this page but should be is a certified divorce financial analyst. So CDFA, a financial advisor. We at Francis Financial, we surveyed 150 women across the country who have gone through the divorce process, and we asked them, all sorts of questions about how it went, what they would change, what they wish they had known back then. And not surprisingly, there were a ton of questions centered around how am I going to be impacted by this financially? Can I keep the house? How am I going to invest the money that I do receive? How am I going to now save for my kids' college education? Tons of financially centered questions, but surprisingly, they didn't know that there were resources out there to help them, like specifically certified divorce financial analysts to help them financially through the divorce process. So it's what's really important as you're going through this process is to understand not just what you can get, but how it's going to impact you financially long term, and answer those questions like, should I keep the house or should we sell it, before you go through the process, because once you've crossed that bridge, there's no undoing it. You want to avoid financial missteps here.
And financial missteps is actually a great segue into, what do I consider during a divorce? What should I be avoiding? Because, most people are approaching a divorce for the first time, maybe the second time, and maybe the third time, but still not many more people are experiencing it more than that. So there's a lot of unknowns in every situation. So when you think about, one that we see is deciding financial issues one at a time, or processing things in a silo. Natalie alluded to this a minute ago when she was saying, when you approach a divorce, sometimes there's so much grief and shock and anger and all these other emotions rolling around in you that a completely rational and analytical person may not approach the divorce process the same way you thought you would once you're actually in it. So one thing that we see time and time again is that clients going through divorce tend to get hyper-focused on things. They lose sight of the forest for the trees. And the problem with that is when it comes to your financial life, a lot of the different aspects of your life are intertwined and entangled and have ramifications on each other. So, we'll use the example that Natalie mentioned, do I keep the house or do I sell it? Well, it's important. That's an important thing to think about. But sometimes people tend to get, I'm keeping the house regardless. But there's other steps to think about. Well, one, what happens if you can you afford it? Can you afford to maintain this house on your own? That's one. If you can't, when you sell it, are you prepared to pay the taxes by yourself, or would you rather split that now? There are things to think about, like, well, do you have enough cash to then retire as well? Because your house can't feed you in retirement. So these are all things to think about. So what we would say is when you're thinking about the different financial aspects, why you can't look at it in the silo is because you may be shooting yourself in the foot by not thinking about something else because you fall in love with one thing. So you want to, it sounds strange, but you do want to cast a more wide net and really kind of be able to zoom out. That's for our clients that tend to be the most successful and have the smoothest divorce transitions are the ones that don't really get too bogged down in the weeds and can kind of keep a high level and understand, I have experts with me, I have an attorney that's in my corner, and let's work together to take this all at once, as opposed to just, really fighting for one thing or the other. At the same time, I mentioned, taxes, capital gains is important. Investment risk is, and this is something we'll talk about later in the presentation as well, but your assets come with different risks, and the risk profile that you have as a couple may not be the same risk profile that you have as a single person. Also, people tend, when they make investments, a lot of people will take the approach of set it and forget it. They'll make an allocation for themselves and just let it ride. Well, if you made that allocation when you first got married 20 years ago, and now you're getting divorced and you're about to be retired, maybe those two goals don't align. So it's important to really take stock of, what risk you can take on as an individual investor, as opposed to a married investor. And we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Inflation may seem like a strange one, but there is impact. $1 today is not the same as $1 in the future. And there are assets that need to be split that have an important ramification on this. Like, let's say a pension. A pension today, if you're getting divorced in your 30s or 40s, and there's a pension out there, it's not going to be the same value of the dollar that you see on that page today that they're going to be paying out at 65. So, similarly with assets that need to be inflated, deferred compensation, that's something you tend to read with executives that, we'll pay you this amount, but you could take it later and we'll give you an inflation rate just for your time. Well, that's something you consider too, because your statement will say one thing, but what are you giving up? Because you don't want to just say, well, necessarily it's 50-50 now. You want to consider the impact of the inflation. So again, you want to lean on your experts here to make sure that you're understanding the full impact and not just say, well, I see this value, let's just split it and be done. And last is transferability, because not everything can be split. Let's say you guys decide, you sit down, it's very easy, 50-50. Well, unfortunately, not all assets can be split 50-50. You know, if there's a stock option plan at work, or even at many plans at work, a stock option plan or some kind of executive compensation, they may say, well, that's great that you guys have decided to get divorced and split 50-50, but we can't put an account in this person's name. They don't work here. So then you have to think about, well, what are the next steps for that? So there, you have to be flexible. I think the takeaway there is just to be flexible about what the trade-offs are going to be to get to the end goal.
Yeah, and this slide is a great example of really needing to lean on the expertise of your team to help you assess all of these different bullet points here, like transferability of assets. That was a great example. Deferred comp plans, you can't just split necessarily, but also think of some non-liquid investments. We, have helped plenty of women who they wrote the divorce, the separation agreement as, all right, I'll take 50% of this account, you take 50% of this account, we're just going to split everything 50-50. And then you look at the accounts, you dive in at a deeper level and you realize, oh, you can't split this investment, and it's locked in for the next 15 years, by the way. So since one spouse or the other purchased it, maybe they should keep that and the other spouse should have gotten some of the other more liquid funds. Or we've seen it also in play out really poorly where the spouse got a whole bunch of locked in investments that she was planning to use to help support her lifestyle in the next couple of years, and then surprise that what an option wasn't available to her.
Right. And that's a great point too, Natalie, because also the transfer, just because something is, you can split it jointly or split it 50-50 doesn't mean that you necessarily should. I think a good example that we see with clients who, let's say there's a rental property that you both own and you want to keep it joint as landlords, fine, you can do that legally, but now you are tied to this person that you may not be so fond of, which is why you're getting divorced, and now you guys are in business together for the foreseeable future. So is that something to consider too, the emotional aspect of, do I want to have to deal with this person ongoing, especially when it comes to financial issues, if there's already been a breakdown in our relationship right now?
I think that's huge. You brought up the rental property or even like a business,
Right.
and understanding, yes, it's great. You might not want to shut down the business or what have you, but do you want to necessarily wake up every day and your 9 to 5 is this business with someone that you don't want to see every single day? So I think that's one of the key things when you talk about just taking the emotion out of it and being very strategic and thinking about, okay, after you sign on the dotted line, you might say, yes, I won. But 30 days later, when you still have to deal with this person, if it's the rental property of replacing the carpet or whatever, is that something you're going to want to do?
Right, Rosalind. You can't put a dollar sign on peace of mind. So that's something to really consider. Like, especially when you're thinking about these wins where I won, I got this. Well, but like at what cost? What emotional cost did you get that at?
There's something else to think about. One sneaky thing we've seen, Devon, I know you've seen this as well, is income taxes. And now I'm sure this is not happening with any of you out there, but particularly sneaky spouses have a habit of overpaying taxes, either through estimated tax payments or because they're owed a refund, but they decide to roll it into next year and it just kind of snowballs and gets bigger and bigger. You have the ability to let the IRS keep a whole bunch of money for you and just roll it into next year. So it's another reason to look at that tax return and have a professional take a look at it who knows what they're looking for, because we've seen tens of thousands of dollars hidden as, overpayment of taxes that are going to be, well, the other person was hoping they'd be paid out when the divorce was done and the wife had forgotten.
Right. And that's a great point. On the topic of sneaky spouses and taxes, capital gains tax is another one where we see people get kind of manipulative, right? Because when you think about, not all accounts are created equal when it comes to what the taxable gain that's built into an account. So if you see 2 accounts that are $500,000 value, you may say, oh, I'll take this one, you take that one, we'll go our separate ways. But what are the taxes built in? And we'll see that sometimes where somebody will say, oh, well, this one's in my name, that one's in your name, so let's just keep it. Whereas one spouse may have almost no gain built into their account because it's a newer account. And the other account is something that they've had for years and years. Maybe they got Amazon back in the day, and now you've got a bunch of taxes due there. So we'll see spouses just say, oh, well, I'll take this one, not hoping that the other spouse won't realize that I'm going to get away pretty much tax-free while you're going to have a huge tax bill down the line. So that's something to always keep in mind too, just what are the tax implications in the future to make sure that you're not trading off something today that's going to hurt you down the line.
And sometimes women like the feel of keeping retirement accounts more than taxable accounts, because retirement accounts feel a little bit more familiar, feel a little bit safer because they're, sometimes with employers or in an IRA. It just feels a little bit different than an investment taxable account. But the thing to keep in mind is, again, taxes down the road. Each dollar you pull from that retirement account is going to be taxed just like it was sent to you in your paycheck, versus from a taxable account where you're paying substantially lower capital gains tax rates. So again, just more to keep in mind. This is a pretty technical slide, but really stresses or underlines the importance of working with professionals who know to look for these things for you. So this is one of those slides where the worst questions come up around debt, because again, it's just not fair. Sometimes, debt acquired during the marriage is a marital asset, unfortunately, a marital liability. And so before you get divorced, understand or come to an agreement about how you're going to pay off these debts, because once that separation agreement is signed, even if it says that he's going to pay 50% of this debt and you're going to pay 50% of that debt, if he doesn't pay 50% of the debt, you're still on the hook. You can't take that divorce decree to your bank and say, but he was supposed to pay, so I am not, in trouble, right? That doesn't work. You're still 100% on the hook. So as much as you can develop strategies for paying them off before your divorce is final, the better off you'll be. And if you run into any issues with this, it's going to be a legal problem. You've got to get your attorney involved and fight.
I think this is a great point, and I don't think that most people even realize that, yes, the divorce said they pay X, but the bank doesn't care. The bank is like, yeah, keep your divorce decree at home. What are some of the strategies, especially I know the person who had the question a few minutes ago about like the tax debt and those kind of things. What are some of the strategies, so before you all finalize and go your separate ways, of getting this debt paid since whoever it is, whether it be the bank or the mortgage company or what have you, what are some of those strategies to make sure that that is cleared so you can really make a clean break?
Well, hopefully there are enough assets that you can use from the divorce to just pay down this debt. That would be ideal. that would be like your number one solution. Just wipe it clean, right? And beyond that, you're really, you really are carrying this liability forward with this other person. If it's something that you two cannot pay off and you just need to pay month to month, there's, unfortunately, you're going to have that liability linger a little bit beyond the divorce. All right, so another thing to consider when you're in the divorce process, before you sign, you want to for sure get an understanding of how you're going to handle these three situations. So transferring pension benefits. Rosalind, I'm sure this is something you are all over. And Devon kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier in the presentation, where you could come up with an agreement with your soon-to-be ex-spouse that says that, okay, your pension that pays out when you're 65, well, I'm 10 years older, so I'm going to want it when I'm 65. So let's just write into the agreement that when I'm 65, your pension will start paying me my 50% of it. But the thing about pension plans is that they have their own guiding set of rules. They don't have to listen to your divorce agreement at all. And we have seen many mistakes made in this area where the divorce decree is signed, everyone is ready to just move on, and then you finally get around to the steps of submitting all of the legal paperwork to deal with how you had decided to split the pension, only to hear back from the pension that that's not possible. So to split a pension in a divorce, it requires what's called a quadro, a qualified divorce, a domestic relations order. That's a legal document. It requires attorneys. It's a really big process many steps going to and from the pension department, the company legal department, to the courts, to your attorneys. It's a big process. And if you sign the divorce decree before that process is done, oftentimes what we see is people have just completely lost steam and the will to move that forward. But oftentimes the pension is one of the largest assets. So it can be really, it can put you in a really bad situation if you don't make sure to get the quadro at the very least approved and sent to the court right before you're signing that settlement agreement. Also take into account what happens if if someone passes away before the pension starts paying out. How are you going to handle that? That all needs to be in this quadro document, and attorneys aren't always as familiar as they should be with quadros, or aren't as in the weeds as they should be. So this is really where a CDFA can come in handy for you if you are looking at dividing a pension and you want to make sure that all of your bases are covered. Securing health insurance is another variable that you want to make sure you have tied down before you sign that divorce agreement. So if you're going through the divorce process and you were on your spouse's plan and they work for an employer who employs more than 20 employees, then you are eligible for 3 years of COBRA. Now, it's not free. You have to pay out of pocket for what that plan costs, and it's not cheap. So that is an expense that needs to be included in your budget. We typically include like $10,000 a year for health insurance, and that's for like a good plan. It's totally going to depend on what your plan is, but the point is you need to get those details from, if you're the one going on COBRA, you need to get those details from your significant other's health or HR department. And then,
And that's,
oh yeah, go ahead.
and I was going to say that 10,000 is for one person. So if you have kids as well, expect that that's going to be another expense if they're not going to be on the spouse's plan for whatever reason. So something to think about.
Right, and keep in mind it's illegal to kick your spouse off of your healthcare plan during the divorce process. So if you're feeling really angry, don't do it. If they do it to you, go to your attorney right away. That's not legal. So we do see some clients come to us and they feel like they are not like it's not their right to be on that healthcare plan. Their husband just decided that they're getting divorced, and all right, you go find your own healthcare. So just so you know, that's not legal. Then changing ownership of accounts, decide how that's going to happen. Typically, the easiest thing to do is if you have at every institution that you have a joint account, you open an account in your own name, your spouse opens an account in their own name. Then once the divorce is finalized, you submit that to the bank, they split the account in half, deposit 50-50 into each of your own individual accounts. But another account actually to consider here are 529 plans. Really important, your 529 plans are for your children, but they're only in the name of one spouse. So if you have 2 children, we've seen some clients where one spouse takes the 529 plan for one of the kids and the other spouse takes the 529 plan for the other child, or some people prefer to just split them 50-50, open new accounts. But important to talk through all of these logistics before the divorce is signed.
And I will piggyback on the account thing. Some people think you can just remove a person, but oftentimes you'll have to close the account in order to remove a person. And I was just reading something, I think it might have been over the weekend, and this man got remarried, and the new spouse or the new husband and wife, their tax return went to the last checking account that the CPA had. And I think it was like their stimulus money or what have you, but that was an old account that was with the now ex-wife and the current
Right.
husband. And so it's one of those things that, well, if the account didn't exist, that would definitely have helped that situation. But the ex-wife wasn't as excited to hand over the extra stimulus money that just dropped in her account. And I don't think everybody, yes, I know nobody wants a new bank account with, all new routing numbers and checking accounts and auto, and, you got to do your auto draft and where your paycheck goes and all those kind of things. But just think down the line, it could be much worse.
Yeah.
That was a fantastic alley hoop into the next slide. It's almost like you know what's coming up, Rosalind, because that's exactly the story that we're going to use as far as like the thing. You've signed the agreement and you're done. Great. You can celebrate that win, but unfortunately the work is not done there yet. There are a few more steps to really set yourself up for that financial success. And Rosalind just alluded to one, canceling those joint accounts, because it's very easy to let things fall through the cracks. And especially in our digital age, we forget about how auto pays work and where auto deposits go. And honestly, if there's a joint account, even if you're divorced, there's nothing stopping the other person from taking money out of that account in many cases. So what you don't want to do is to have money go into that and the other person out of spite, just like, you know what, I'm taking this. What are you gonna do about it? So really close those accounts so you don't run into trouble with these auto pays and these auto deposits, because it's something that we see all the time. Something with retitling the assets in your name. It's really important. And I would say take it even a step further, that when you're doing online access, really be considerate about the security questions that you're using. Because you're married to this person for a long time. So if they really wanted to, there are a lot of questions that they can just get right off of the strength of being married to you. So when you are creating these new accounts and you are selecting these security questions, think about things that are more recent, that maybe that spouse won't know. So when you may not want to put the name of your actual best friend, or you may not want to put the actual street that you grew up on, maybe change that a bit to something that they won't be able to guess. Because honestly, there are situations out there where people get angry and people get irrational. So don't set yourself up for that situation. Another one is beneficiaries. People forget this all the time. And then to really drill this point home, I will give you guys a horror story. Beneficiaries are very important. I work with a client that she was the beneficiary on an account. Her spouse died. He had adult children from another marriage. The children and my client were estranged. They did not see eye to eye. They never did. His will said that the account goes to them. The beneficiary was her. So if you had to guess what happens here, maybe you would guess, oh, well, he has a will. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, because beneficiaries trump will. So the account went to her, and you can imagine how messy this got, because they said, well, we don't like her, and it says us on the will. And she said, well, I don't like them, and it says me on the beneficiary. What are we going to do? So that is a situation where changing your beneficiaries is very important, and it can slip through the cracks. It's something you forget about. It's out of sight, out of mind. Sometimes you have to even click on another tab to even see who the beneficiaries are. So it's just a checklist that any account that you have, most people just put their spouse, so just double check every single account to make sure that money is not going to someone that you don't want it to go to, because the law is on their side if you do leave them as a beneficiary. So sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the theme of this this final section is really like, yay, your settlement agreement is signed. That's amazing. You're not done yet. Like, you gotta just like keep going to the finish line. There's like 100 yards left and you're almost there.
Right. And insurance and estate plan, it's the same thought process, right? At the end of the day, you don't want assets or payouts going to the wrong person, because getting it back is very sticky, very difficult, very costly from a time and a money perspective. So once you're done, really check that divorce decree, dot your I's, cross your T's, and make sure you've changed the right names that need to be changed.
We had
Piggyback on that too. So if your estate plan says your ex-husband is the person who makes your medical decisions, and they're also the beneficiary, I'm not going to guess. I mean, I'm not going to say they're a horrible person, but are they going to be the most aggressive in terms of making sure that you pull through? Or maybe a little more indifferent if there's something in there for them. So take away all the incentive and connection. So go through all those pieces. I don't want my now enemy, or maybe not enemy, but someone I don't necessarily care for, to be the person that's in charge of me if I was incapacitated, or if the doctor says, should we or should we not? What would she have wanted? That's not the person that I want to make that decision on my behalf.
100%.
Absolutely. We've also seen really amicable divorces where they sign the settlement agreement. So all the finances are pretty much settled, and they're like, all right, well, you get the car, but I know it's still in my name. It really doesn't matter. Like, I don't mind just paying the insurance for it. It's really cheap, whatever. Or you can give me a check each month. And this is legitimately a situation that we had to coach a client through, which took a year to convince her that this was a bad idea. It's a really bad idea in this case, because if you get into an accident, is a real gray area for insurance, real gray area, and that's what you want to avoid it. And there are all sorts of these like little things that just sort of hang on and linger, especially if you're in an amicable situation. You need to be very clean, follow through with all of this, this cleanup work. Create a new budget. So going into the divorce, you really want to get a handle on what your marital lifestyle is like. That could help in the amount of support that you receive from your spouse. But going forward, once you're through with the divorce process, you really need to work with an advisor to understand how much you can spend going forward. What does that new budget look like? And how much should you be saving? That's a big one for retirement, for other intermediate goals like your kids' college education. How much should you have in your emergency fund? What are your, what are your new expenses now? And very often they're higher than what you expect, just like all of ours, but do your best to anticipate those types of things, particularly before you make any big purchases, such as a home. If you can rent for a year after the separation, just to get a feel for where you might want to live. A lot can change. You're still in massive transition in your life. But create a new budget going forward and make sure that that aligns with your long-term financial plan.
And along those lines, too, you want to rebuild that emergency fund that may have been depleted when you split it with your spouse now during the divorce process. And then this is a real emergency account. This is not the same as your savings account that you only dip into for Christmas and certain special occasions. This is an account that you only touch for emergencies, and it covers about 3 to 6 months of living expenses, which you have a good handle on now because you did that in the beginning of the process when you're thinking about what you need, and then you created your new budget so you know what your living expenses are. But 3 to 6 months is the minimum. And if you are in a situation where you have uneven cash flows, like you collect invoices that are paid on a quarterly basis, or you rely on big child support payments or spousal support payments, and your ex-spouse gets huge bonuses at the year end and they pay you out from that. These are situations where you may want to do a 6 to 12 months just to kind of get yourself, bridge those gaps between those next cash flows, just in case something pops up, because life happens. We've seen that over the last year. Life happens. You don't want to be caught flat-footed when these emergencies pop up. Oh, and investing your assets as well. This is something we alluded to in the beginning of the presentation, that your profile as an investor, as a couple, evolves over time, but it may not be the same, especially when the goals have changed and you're really balancing that with another person's views and values. It may not be the same. So this is a good time when you get these new assets after you split to take stock of who you are as an investor. What are you investing for? What are the goals? Is it retirement? Is it a new home? Is it your portion of college? Whatever that is, really hammer down what those goals are, what those time frames are, and get a handle on working. I would recommend working with an advisor, but otherwise, just understanding of how you're going to invest for those goals to get from point A to point B, and what are these different investments that, in many cases in a divorce, you have an investment account, and they just split it the way that it is. So the investments that are in there are just split. That's fine, but they may not be appropriate for you. So you really want to take stock of what are these investments, who picked them, why did we pick them, and are they still appropriate?
Yeah, and actually, that just spurred something. You want to be really on top of the splitting of the assets after the divorce. A lot of times, again, people are fatigued once that agreement is signed, and they just want it to be over with, and they give it to their financial professionals, and they just trust that it's going to be split 50-50. And if you've got a cash account, it's pretty easy to double check that, right? But if you have an investment account, are you really getting 50% your share of each, every investment that you hold, and are you getting your 50% of that tax basis as well, so that it's really evenly split? We've worked with clients on this. This is one of the things that we really emphasize, is overseeing that process of splitting the accounts. And I worked with one client for 10 months, just double checking the other advisor's work And there was not a form that I saw that did not have an error. And she would have been shorted tens of thousands of dollars. And I don't think it was malicious. I think it was just lazy. The advisor knew they were losing her as a client. They were, you know, keeping the husband's assets. There were a lot of accounts, to be fair, but they're just not going to put in the level of care and attention to detail as what you're going to want to make sure that you get everything that you're entitled to.
100%.
We're not going to go into, oh, sorry, Devon, were you going to say something?
No, I 100% agree with you. And then, yeah, risk, you know, there are great calculators online for risk. We're not going to get into nitty gritty. The takeaway here is, you know, stocks and bonds are really the way you determine risk in your portfolio. Stocks, we like to think about it. If you think about your portfolio as a car, stocks are the engine, bonds are that airbag, that if you want to win a race, great, you need a great engine. And stocks are sexy, so people talk about stocks all the time. But bonds are really that airbag to the portfolio that if you crash, you want to hope those airbags deploy. It's the same thought process that if the market crashes, those bonds are going to hold that value. So that's why they're important for the portfolio. So that's one way to like really determine, well, how risky am I? Think about, well, when the market is down, how do you react? And that's when you need to be looking, well, I need to up my bond allocation if I get really skittish, because, you know, that's the key there. But as I mentioned, there are great calculators online and resources and tools, and advisors can typically help you with that to determine if you don't know how risky you are. But again, the takeaway here is just stocks and bonds are the way you balance out risk in the portfolio.
Yeah, and just to help, you know, everyone here, we obviously can't go into detail about how you should invest. That's a whole other webinar. But the two mistakes we see women make most often, one is not making any moves at all. So either they, like you said, Devon, they keep whatever stocks and bonds and mutual funds that they inherited from the marriage, or they just get a lot of cash and it's, you know, there's this fear associated with investing it. Or we see them invest too conservatively. That's a big problem as well. Women are shown to be better investors than men long term because we tend to stick with the plan and leave things to grow over the long term, which is one of the most important variables when it comes to successful long-term investing. So be as aggressive as you can within your risk tolerance and with your goals, and get invested. Definitely get invested. So some of the resources that we have available to you, we have some divorce checklists, which are super handy, a list of all sorts of documentation that you should be gathering and getting in preparation as you're considering going through divorce. We have a divorce guide. We have a podcast that is awesome. Every couple of weeks, we interview another professional in the divorce arena and have, gosh, hundreds of episodes, I think, at this point. Devon was on one of the episodes as well. And then there's that risk tolerance calculator as well. So lots of resources to share with everyone today.
Well, we had a lot to say. We went a little bit over time. We apologize for that, but we hope we shared a lot of great information.
No, I think some good stuff. One of the things somebody mentioned, they were surprised about what you said in terms of the tax returns, because I would have never thought to like keep rolling over. And now the IRS is kind of holding or protecting. You never think the IRS would be the person protecting money for you. Are there some other things when you think of like sneaky spouse things that people should be aware of or concerned about? Or, I mean, I remember back, I had a client and they were signing the wife's name on property that he purchased in her name that she wasn't aware of, and then he was selling them and she wasn't aware of. But I mean, are there other things that you're seeing when you think, goodness gracious, where are they hiding assets, or how are they hiding assets, or failing to disclose of assets? Are there some of those things you can think of too?
Yeah.
When it comes to small businesses, especially, one thing to keep in mind goes with the tax return as well. If your significant other has a small business and it's a cash business and you're signing off on a tax return that shows that the income from the business is $40,000 a year, but you know that you have a home out in the Hamptons and a home in the city and you're doing pretty well for yourselves. When it comes time to get spousal support, the courts are going to use the tax return, which you signed. So if there's this cash operation and you're not reporting all the income as you should be, that could come back to bite you.
And keeping with the line of the small business, I think that's the one that jumps out the most. It tends to be easier to manipulate your income when you have a small business with things like deductions. You know, we'll see clients take a bunch of legal deductions like amortization and things like that, but that doesn't really impact your ability to pay someone else. So these are things that you need to look for. If your spouse is showing a certain level of income, really look back to see what they're deducting. And, you know, if they're deducting, depreciation on computers and things like that, well, that's a tax write-off for them, but that doesn't really impact the cash that they have at the end of the year. So it's important to think about that as far as what you're asking for. And similarly with cash in the business, a lot of the times people will do divorce planning. They have a business and they won't take a salary, or they'll take a lower salary this year and just keep cash in the business. Well, why do they do that? That's a conversation that needs to be had, because yes, it may be completely legitimate. They may have a big tax bill coming up, or they just don't want to pay you, and that's why they're keeping it in the business. So that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, and something else, unvested stock for either RSUs or stock options. If your spouse works at a big company like Google or Facebook or a big bank, and they're getting stock options and RSUs, unvested does not mean it's not marital. So that's an important distinction there. There's a calculation, the De Jesus calculation, that your financial advisor can run for you to determine what percentage of even those unvested shares are up for marital split.
I think that's big. Somebody's hiding some money now. Talking about, oh no. Now, one question, what are your thoughts on a post-nuptial agreement? So someone didn't get around to the prenup and now they're like, well, we're a couple years into the marriage. I would think you want to, bring in the whole team, almost similar to if you're going through the actual divorce, but any guidance or thoughts there?
Yeah, post-ups are great in a variety of circumstances. One is especially when there's a business, especially when the business is a good portion of your net worth, because it's not necessarily signaling to the spouse that, hey, I assume that we're getting divorced, that's why we're doing this post-nup. It could just be that, like, hey, our business is more than our net worth. So if something happens, I don't want to be stuck with the business, and then you just take everything. I'm sleeping on the couch in the business. So that's one thing, way to just protect yourself. It's not you're accusing your spouse of anything, or it's not trying to cut them out. It's just trying to be what's fair. Especially, when there's a business that we mentioned before, you may not want to work together. So these are the kind of things that you can hash out in a post-nuptial agreement. I will say the con of a post-nup is that they're much harder to enforce or get done than a prenup. Right? With the prenup, you have the incentive of sign this or I'm not going to marry you. Whereas a post-nup, it's like, hey, sign this, please. And then the person says, no. Okay, I don't really have that same leverage that I had in the prenup situation. So it is a little bit more difficult to get implemented, but it has great uses.
I don't know, Devon, that sounded like it was signed under duress. But yeah, I think, financial date nights can go a long way in fostering a healthy conversation around finances in your relationship. One of the first questions to start with when you're having this conversation with your spouse is, tell me what money was like for you growing up in your household. How does that impact the way that you think about money? And once you know where you are coming from and where your spouse is coming from in terms of how you think about money, you can have a much more constructive conversation around why you may want to have a post-nup or a prenup. And it even pays to go and see a couples therapist if you're having a difficult time and you're reaching a block and this is something that's important to you, to have that neutral third party that can maybe help facilitate that conversation better.
Now, one question too, and we know a lot of these things are going to be state specific. So some of the ladies are out earning their spouse, and so they're concerned about their money. They don't want to lose theirs in a divorce. And some, it may be the opposite. Are there states that are going to be more friendly or less friendly, or maybe even as we think about some target timelines? I know sometimes it's like the 5-year mark, the 10-year mark, and those kind of things. Is it time to move if you have more and you need to be in a more friendly to you states? Are those some things that people should be thinking of as well if they live in California versus, New Hampshire or what have you?
Yeah, Yeah, you're right, Rosalind. It is state specific, and there are typically two types of states. There's community property states and equitable distribution states. Community property, it's 50-50. It's what people tend to think of when you're in a divorce. Whereas equitable doesn't mean equal. Like New York is equitable. So it's what they decide is fair. So if, someone way out earns their spouse and another person has no really earning potential, the court may decide, let's split it 60-40 because he or she needs more because the other person can out earn. That is something to consider. I will say the commonality between the two is marital property is what's going to drive this. So even if someone's way out earning their spouse, the argument is that that's marital property. They can earn that way because what the spouse brings to the marriage, it frees them up to work the way that they do. Or that's just the thought of, I'm not saying that that's what's going on in everyone's marriage, but that's the way the courts are looking at it. That if you're earning it, whether it's $1 million or it's 100,000, if you're earning it during the marriage, you're earning it with the help of your spouse. So it's tough there as far as maneuvering around things. If it's marital property, it's marital property, whether it's in your name or not. That goes with accounts as well. If you have an account let's say I have an account in my name and it's doing great, but I started it during the marriage, court doesn't care that it's in my name. That's marital property. So that's really what's going to be the key there.
Now, if you do have a big bonus coming up, or any big bonus coming up in the future, may make sense to serve the divorce papers before you get that and draw that line in the sand.
Mhm.
Now, for the ladies who maybe they're on to their second, maybe third marriage, and they have children from a previous relationship, what are some things that they can do to protect the assets for those children from the previous relationship from that maybe next spouse? They want to make sure that child has, something happens and they pass away or they're incapacitated or just simply a divorce. What are some things that they need to be aware of as they're protecting that nest egg for that next generation?
Estate planning. Estate planning. You don't have to be married to do estate planning in advance, especially with children from a prior marriage. But that's a conversation you want to have before the marriage, for sure.
Right. And I would just add to that too, like trusts. I think people often think that trusts are for like ultra wealthy people, and not necessarily. That could be a really great example of when someone who doesn't consider themselves super wealthy would need a trust, right? It's your assets for the kids from your previous marriage that are protected, and someone that you trust is the trustee, whether that's your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister. It's someone that's in your corner making those decisions. That's a perfect example of when you may need a trust and you're not a multimillionaire. So these are things to think about, that not everything is so cut and dry that, oh, that's not for me. Always keep an open mind. What you may thought may not have been for you, your circumstances change and now it is for you.
Yeah, and if the concern is another divorce that could then split the assets again, then again, here we are back at prenup, postnup.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side of that too, like let's say you have kids and your spouse has remarried and you want to make sure your kids are taken care of. If he doesn't just forget about your spouse doesn't forget about your kids because they're in a new relationship. That's where tools like life insurance could come in handy. That you have a life insurance policy on the spouse, that this is for our kids, that if something happens to you, I'm not worried about, well, what new kids or new wives are coming with their hands out. I know my kids are taken care of because we have that policy with my kids or me as the beneficiary.
That's a great point. And we see that written into settlement agreements all the time, that the, let's say the insurance policy is on the husband, and it's written into the agreement that the husband will submit to all of the, the insurance steps to become eligible for life insurance, but the wife has the policy and she's paying the premium. She's making sure that that policy stays in effect. Note that they won't pay out the insurance policy if you are the one that kills your ex, but we do see that used all the time.
You gotta watch a little ID channel to make sure you don't get caught. Get on the facts. One other question. So we know that you all are in New York. Do you work with people outside of New York?
Yes, we do all the time. Yep, we have
We do.
clients across the country. I'm working with 2 in California right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we're not landlocked like attorneys where you have to pass the bar. We will just work with a client and work with their attorney that's local. If you're in Denver, we want to work with a Colorado attorney. We'll set you up with a Colorado attorney, and then they will shepherd the legal portion of it, and we'll help you with the finances.
That's good stuff, ladies. I'm gonna drop their contact information in there again, just to make sure you have it. If you want to just consult, think about it. Maybe you're not prepared yet. Maybe that bonus isn't, next month. You got another month or so before you need to get these papers together. Let's see, are there any other questions? I think that's all the questions that we have. Natalie and Devon, this is such great information. And regardless if divorce is in your near future, but really and truly, if you are married, in a relationship, dating, about to get married, just got married, just having your financial picture in order and having things separate enough that you can grow on your own, that you can sustain on your own, because it might not be a divorce. Unfortunately, people pass at every age, and you may just have to pick up the pieces from there too. So I remember I told the ladies, don't not join this one, because somebody gonna be like, is she? I thought she was happy on Facebook yesterday. And so it's not that. It's really just understanding there are a number of reasons that we have to start looking at the way that things are situated, that one, we should understand what we have, and then just take control of your own financial destiny. We have to do that, because statistics are going to say, regardless of how great your marriage is, statistically, you're probably going to outlive your spouse. So to be most prepared is going to mean that you need to understand where everything is. You don't want bill collectors calling you and you're still in mourning or whatever it might be, to just be on top of things the most that you possibly can. Natalie and Devon, any closing remarks for the team?
Well, thank you so much for having us tonight. It's been, a pleasure. We are so fueled to do this by our own personal experiences, and we really hope that we've been able to share some helpful information. We're always happy to continue the conversation, to answer some one-on-one questions. If anyone out there has them, we take everybody through a complimentary meeting with us, and at the very least, even if we're not the right fit, we point you in the right direction and can give you the resources that you need.
Absolutely. And thank you again for letting a man into this sacred space. I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad that we could give some, hopefully, very valuable information.
Well, we love it, and we absolutely appreciate it. We got a few thank yous, some hearts, some thumbs up. We want to appreciate your knowledge, because a lot of times, and I'm hoping that most people, if you ever experience it, you only experience it once and you don't become a pro. So then you have to lean on a pro. But if you become a pro, at least, share your facts and stay up to date on how things change. And so regardless, ladies, regardless of what happens, if you are sharing finances, even if you never get married, understand that you can still be financially tied to someone. And so just the simple planning of understanding what you have, understanding your goals, how to get there, what it means, and what happens if any of that situation changes is key. And so I want to thank so much for this information. Ladies, I'm going to drop the contact information in the chat as well, so you'll have that, pick it up. You don't have to tell anybody you called them. You don't have to share that with anybody, but get that free consultation, get some comfort, understand, do not stay in a situation purely from a financial benefit. It can cause so much havoc on your personal health, your well-being, and the longevity of your life, that it is never worth it to stay in a toxic situation just because of finances. So take back your power and be in a situation that you can walk away if you need to. I want to thank our speakers tonight. I want to thank you all for joining us. And until next Monday, please continue your journey towards financial independence. And if we can help in any way, just let us know. Have a great Monday.
Thank you.